The Deathworlder girl's quiet observation erupted into brilliant strategy as Maya activated her master plan. 26 fleet segments performed synchronized microjumps, creating a gravitational resonance cascade that shattered the supposedly impenetrable defenses without firing a single shot. As alarms blared and systems collapsed, her calm voice explained the elegant physics that had just revolutionized galactic warfare forever. The soft blue glow of holographic displays bathed the amphitheater in ethereal light, casting strange shadows across the varied anatomies of the gathered cadets. At the rear of the classroom, Maya Watson sat perfectly still, her brown eyes methodically scanning the room, taking in every detail with quiet intensity. Her slender but wiry frame betrayed her origins, a small patch of gray fur on the crown of her head, marking her as a descendant of colonists from Chorus Major, a planet with twice Earth's gravity. Commander Zalavx stood at the center of the lecture hall, his 6 limbs arranged in the formal teaching posture of his species. His blue scales caught the light as he gestured toward the tactical display. The rippling movement sent small waves across his ceremonial teaching cloak, adorned with the insignia of 27 teaching cycles at the galaxy's most prestigious military academy. Today, his voice resonated with the distinctive harmonic overtones of his species. We continue our examination of advanced fleet formations, specifically the Johnny Battle Formation pioneered by the Dravani during the SETI expansion. The gathered cadets, representing 17 different species from across the Galactic Confederation, leaned forward in anticipation. All, except Maya, whose stillness was so complete it bordered on unnerving. From the corner of his compound eye, Zalavx noted her posture. His secondary breathing flaps twitched in irritation. 5 standard cycles ago, when the Confederation had begrudgingly extended membership to the humans, Deathworlders, as many still called them, he had opposed the motion. Bringing creatures from a harsh planet with such aggressive evolutionary backgrounds into the Confederation posed too many risks, in his estimation. And now one sat in his advanced tactics class. She had somehow scored high enough on the entrance examinations to warrant a place, though Zalaf suspected political maneuvering more than merit. Humans had only achieved faster-than-light travel a mere 10 years earlier, a technological infant by Confederation standards. The holographic model before you, Zalavs continued, gesturing to the complex, 13-dimensional battle simulation hovering above the central projector, represents the standard Johnny Wedge formation. Note the hierarchical communication structure, the subspace disruptor positioning, and the psychological warfare elements embedded within the formation's visible patterns. The alien students nodded, some taking notes on neural interfaces, others manipulating small personal displays. A few Taurids in the front row were already working through the battle equations with their specialized appendages. Now, Zalav's voice dropped an octave, a challenge in his tone. Who can identify the 3 critical weaknesses of the Johnny Battle Formation? 6 appendages from various species shot into the air immediately. Maya's hands remained folded in her lap, but her eyes narrowed slightly. Zalavx called on a Volarid student, whose tentacle-like appendages waved excitedly. The first weakness is vulnerability to flanking maneuvers, if the enemy can penetrate the subspace disruption field. The Volarid answered, feathery gills fluttering with pride. Correct, Zalavs nodded. Next? A Taurid cadet, skin glimmering with metallic patches, spoke next. The formation requires precise coordination of all vessels. Disabling even 3% of the fleet's communication nodes can cause catastrophic formation failure. Excellent observation, Zalov said, his scales shifting to a pleased hue. And the third? A Frisian cadet, whose crystalline exoskeleton refracted the holographic light into tiny rainbows across the lecture hall, offered the final answer. The psychological impact components require specific knowledge of the enemy's cultural background. Against unknown species or mixed forces, its effectiveness drops by 78%. Precisely, Zalofs confirmed, unable to keep a note of satisfaction from his voice. His gaze swept the room, deliberately pausing on Maya. As you can see, understanding the traditional formations requires both analytical rigor and cultural context, things that come with centuries of galactic cooperation and study. The subtle barb hung in the air. Several students turned to glance at Maya, whispering among themselves about the Deathworlder who could barely fly a decade ago. Zalovex was about to continue when he noticed something unexpected. The human's lips had curved upward slightly, a smile, if he recalled the term correctly from the xenobiology briefing. Though to his species, the baring of teeth often signaled aggressive intent, he remembered that in humans, it could indicate numerous emotional states. "Is there something you wish to add, Cadet Watson?" he asked, his voice carrying a hint of challenge. The lecture hall fell silent. Maya's eyes met his without hesitation. "Time," she said simply. The word hung in the air, puzzling many of the gathered students. Zalov's primary heart skipped a beat. Surely she couldn't mean. "Elaborate," he commanded, masking his sudden discomfort. "The Johnny Battle formation assumes engagement ranges within a few light seconds," Maya explained, her voice steady and clear, despite being significantly softer than most species in the room. Its entire tactical advantage collapses when fighting across distances, requiring more than 20 seconds of light-speed communication lag. The formation was designed for close-quarters battle, but is now being deployed across increasingly vast distances as our propulsion technology outpaces our communication systems. Zalovex felt his scales involuntarily shifting to a darker hue, the equivalent of a flush in his species. She was correct, and moreover, she had identified a weakness he himself had only recently documented in a research paper that wasn't even part of the standard curriculum. "And where, precisely, did you encounter this particular insight, Cadet?" he asked, his voice carefully modulated to hide his surprise. Maya's expression remained neutral. "I read your paper on temporal asymmetry in combat operations. Commander, your analysis of time-lagged response patterns was particularly illuminating." A ripple of murmurs spread through the classroom. Zalofs found himself momentarily at a loss for words, an unusual occurrence in his 27 cycles of teaching. Not only had this Deathworlder read his academic work beyond the curriculum, but she had extracted and applied its principles to identify a critical weakness that most veteran tacticians overlooked. "I see," he finally managed, his professional demeanor reasserting itself. "That is indeed a consideration, though perhaps beyond the scope of today's foundational discussion." Maya inclined her head slightly in acknowledgement. But Zalovs couldn't shake the feeling that something had fundamentally shifted in his classroom. The human returned to her characteristic stillness, but now every student in the room seemed acutely aware of her presence. Clearing his throat with a distinctive harmonic rumble, Zalovs continued the lecture, but his compound eyes kept drifting back to the quiet human in the back row. Perhaps, he thought reluctantly, there was more to these Deathworlders than he had initially assumed. The days that followed brought a subtle but unmistakable change to Commander Zalovex's advanced tactics class. Maya Watson continued to sit quietly, rarely volunteering information unless directly questioned. But when she did speak, her insights cut through conventional thinking with unsettling precision. During the third week, as the class analyzed the famous Torrid Trident maneuver, Maya pointed out how the classical formation failed to account for gravitational microlensing effects in dense stellar regions, a factor that had contributed to 3 historic defeats that traditional Confederation tactical analysis had attributed to commander error. In the 5th week, while dissecting Volurid swarm tactics, she submitted a paper applying multi-point engagement theory to distributed fleet elements essentially suggesting that small vessels could perform coordinated microjumps to create unpredictable attack vectors. The implications were so concerning that Zalavix immediately forwarded the paper to the Confederation Defense Ministry for review. "I don't understand it," Driss, Zalav's teaching assistant, whispered as they observed the students working through a complex tactical simulation. "The human doesn't even use a neural enhancer to process the higher dimensional calculations. She's doing everything with her organic brain." Zalavix's breathing flaps fluttered in agitation. "That's what concerns me. Her species evolved on a high-gravity death trap of a planet, surrounded by predators. Their brains developed to track movement patterns, anticipate threats, and analyze complex variables without technological assistance." "Is that really so different from the evolutionary paths of other species?" Driss asked. "The difference," Zalavx said quietly, "is that most species evolved past the need for such intensive threat assessment once they developed technology and civilization. Humans haven't had that luxury. They still think like predators, even as they build starships." The weeks passed, and as the end of the academic cycle approached, tension mounted in the classroom. The final examination loomed, a grueling 3-day tactical simulation that would determine which cadets would progress to the elite Advanced Fleet Command track. "Attention," Zalavx announced on the final day of regular instruction. "Your culminating assessment will commence tomorrow at first light. Each of you will command a simulated fleet against a defensive position controlled by an adaptive AI that I have personally programmed." A nervous murmur rippled through the classroom. "The objective is simple. Capture the Central Space Station while preserving as much of your fleet and the surrounding civilian infrastructure as possible. You will have 3 simulated days to achieve this objective." Driss stepped forward, distributing neural interface connectors to each student. "These will link you to the simulation environment. You will experience time compression. 3 simulated days will pass in approximately 24 actual hours." A Gorn cadet raised a clawed appendage. "Commander, is it true that no student has ever successfully completed this simulation in your 27 teaching cycles?" Zalavex's scales shifted to a deep blue of pride. "That is correct, Cadet. The simulation adapts to every strategy ever attempted. Each failure makes it stronger." His gaze swept across the room, lingering momentarily on Maya. "Some have come close. Many have demonstrated admirable tactical thinking, but none have achieved the objective." The human's expression remained unreadable, but Zalavx thought he detected a subtle change in her posture, a slight straightening of her spine, perhaps, or a new intensity in her gaze. "Prepare yourselves," he concluded. "Tomorrow, you face the ultimate test of your tactical abilities." As the students filed out, Zalavx noticed that Maya was the last to leave, her movements deliberate and unhurried. Something about her calm demeanor unsettled him more than any overt confidence or bravado might have. The simulation chamber hummed with energy as 24 cadets lay in specially designed interface couches, their minds linked to the complex tactical environment. Zalavx and Driss monitored their progress from a central command station, surrounded by displays showing each cadet's position, fleet status, and decision tree. "The Torrid cadet has already launched a major offensive," Driss observed, pointing to a cluster of red indicators. "Classic hammer and anvil approach." Zalavix nodded. "Bold, but predictable. The simulation will have countermeasures prepared specifically for this strategy." Sure enough, within 3 simulated hours, the Torrid's forces were scattered and largely destroyed, their carefully coordinated attack broken by precision strikes against key command vessels. "The Volurid students are deploying swarm tactics," Driss continued, highlighting another section of the display. "More subtle, but I've observed this approach in 7 previous cycles." "Indeed," Zalavx murmured. "The simulation recognizes the pattern. Watch how it creates counterswarms to disrupt their formation." By the end of the first simulated day, 3 cadets had been eliminated entirely, their fleets destroyed, or rendered combat ineffective. 7 more were in defensive postures, trying desperately to regroup after failed initial assaults. "What about the human?" Zalovex asked, trying to sound merely curious rather than concerned. Driss tapped a control, bringing Maya's tactical display to the foreground. "She's doing nothing." Zalovex leaned forward, compound eyes focusing on the readout. Maya's simulated fleet remained in its starting position, engines at minimal power, weapon systems in standby mode. "Is there a malfunction in her interface?" he asked. Driss checked the diagnostic panel. "No, Commander. All systems are functioning normally. She's conscious and actively connected to the simulation. She's receiving all tactical data and fleet status reports. She's just watching." Zalovex felt a flicker of irritation. Perhaps she's overwhelmed by the complexity. This simulation requires managing 11-dimensional space and coordinating hundreds of vessels simultaneously. Yet her neural activity readings are exceptionally high, Driss noted. She's processing something intensively. As the second simulated day began, more cadets launched their offensives. A group of Johnny students attempted a coordinated wedge attack, only to be outflanked and decimated. 2 Frisian cadets employed a more patient approach, probing the defensive perimeter methodically. But even they suffered heavy losses for minimal gains. By midday, only 7 cadets remained in contention, their fleets damaged but still operational. And then, Maya moved. "Commander," Driss called urgently, "the human has initiated fleet actions." Zalovex moved quickly to observe the display. What he saw confused him initially. Maya had divided her fleet into 12 small groups, each comprising no more than 20 vessels. But instead of coordinating them in any recognizable formation, she was sending them on seemingly random microjumps throughout the simulated star system. "What is she doing?" he muttered, more to himself than to Driss. "It appears to be some form of reconnaissance," Driss suggested, "but the pattern is unusual." Over the next 6 simulated hours, Maya's fleet performed more than 200 microjumps, never engaging enemy forces directly, never remaining in one position long enough to be targeted effectively. Each jump created a small subspace distortion, negligible individually. But Zalovex began to notice something concerning about their collective pattern. "She's mapping the response times," he realized aloud. Each jump probes a different section of the defensive perimeter, testing how quickly the simulation reacts and with what force. Driss looked puzzled. "But that information alone won't help her breach the defenses. The simulation adapts too quickly for such data to remain relevant." "Unless—" Zalovex fell silent, a troubling thought forming in his mind. By the end of the second simulated day, only 4 cadets remained. A particularly tenacious Gorn, who had managed a lightning strike that damaged several defensive installations before retreating. A Volurid who had conserved resources by employing minimal commitment probing attacks. A Frisian, who had partially copied Maya's approach of distributed forces. And Maya herself, whose fleet remained entirely intact but had yet to fire a single shot in anger. "I don't understand her strategy," Driss admitted, as they prepared to monitor the final simulated day. "She's performed over 2,000 microjumps now, but hasn't attempted to approach the space station or engage any defensive forces directly." Zalovex had been studying the pattern of jumps with growing concern. "There's a method here," he said slowly. "Each jump corresponds to a specific weakness in the defensive perimeter, but no single jump exploits the weakness enough to matter. It's as if she's—" He trailed off, unwilling to voice his suspicion. "As if she's what, Commander?" Driss prompted. Zalovex shook his head. "It's impossible. No organic mind could calculate the cumulative effect of so many small distortions across an 11-dimensional battle space." As the third and final day of the simulation began, the remaining cadets made their decisive moves. The Gorn launched another lightning attack, more desperate than the first, and was quickly neutralized. The Valerid attempted a more nuanced approach, but ultimately fell to the adaptive defensive systems. The Frisian held out longer, having learned from Maya's tactics, but lacked the comprehensive understanding needed to truly exploit them. 4 hours before the simulation's conclusion, only Maya remained. And then, she acted, all at once. Her entire fleet, hundreds of vessels that had been scattered throughout the system, performed synchronized jumps back to their original starting positions. There, they reorganized into 26 equally sized clusters, arranged in a precise, spherical formation around the star system. "What is she planning?" Driss whispered, eyes fixed on the display. "I don't know," Zalox admitted, a rare concession that revealed his growing unease. Then, simultaneously, all 26 fleet segments performed coordinated microjumps, not toward the space station, but to seemingly arbitrary positions throughout the system. The moment they arrived, they jumped again, and again, and again. Alarms began to sound throughout the command center. "Commander," Driss called urgently, "the simulation is reporting widespread sensor anomalies. Defensive systems are registering multiple ghost targets." Zalovex stared at the master display in disbelief as red warning indicators spread across the defensive network. System integrity at 60%, 53%, 48%. "What's happening?" Driss demanded, frantically checking diagnostic panels. The communication system crackled, and Maya's calm voice filled the command center. "I believe what you're observing, Commander, is a gravitational resonance cascade," she explained, as if discussing a mild weather phenomenon rather than the complete collapse of an allegedly impenetrable defensive system. "When these 26 fleet groups perform synchronized jumps in the pattern I've established, they create subspace distortions that resonate with each other across the entire system." Zalox watched in stunned silence as the defensive network continued to deteriorate. "The cumulative effect," Maya continued, "is sufficient to disrupt the coherence of your defensive grid. Each small distortion amplifies the next, creating a cascade failure that your systems cannot compensate for quickly enough. System integrity at 32%, 27%. "This is theoretical work," Zalovex managed to say, his voice strained. "The mathematics for gravitational resonance across multiple subspace domains is still being developed. How could you possibly calculate—" "I didn't calculate every interaction," Maya interrupted gently. "I observed the pattern of responses from your defensive systems during my reconnaissance phase and extrapolated the resonance frequencies empirically. The basic principles are outlined in your own paper on subspace harmonic interference patterns, though you focused primarily on communications disruption rather than defensive system degradation. System integrity at 15%, widespread sensor failure, defensive targeting systems offline." While the defense grid was at its weakest, Maya's fleet suddenly ceased its jump pattern. All vessels simultaneously reoriented toward the central space station and began a direct approach at maximum speed. With the defensive systems in disarray, unable to distinguish real targets from the thousands of ghost images created by the subspace distortions, Maya's fleet reached the station unopposed. The simulation's central display flashed with a message Zalovex had never seen in 27 cycles of teaching. Simulation objective achieved. Time elapsed, 68H, 17 Member, 4s. Casualties, 0. Structural integrity, 100%. Innovation score, unprecedented. The command center fell into stunned silence. "Impossible," Driss whispered. "She didn't fire a single shot." Maya's voice came through once more, serene and matter-of-fact. "Thank you, Commander. It was an instructive exercise." The interface connections began to disengage as the simulation concluded. Zalovex stood motionless, staring at the display that announced the first defeat of his vaunted tactical simulation in nearly 3 decades of teaching. "Commander," Driss ventured after a long silence, "what does this mean?" Zalavex's scales had shifted to a pale, uncertain hue. "It means," he said slowly, "that we have much to learn about the way Deathworlders think." News of Maya's unprecedented success spread through the Academy with the speed of quantum entanglement. By the time the cadets had fully disconnected from the simulation interfaces, a small crowd had gathered outside the command center, including several senior instructors and, most surprisingly, Admiral Pex himself. The Admiral, a grizzled Gorn whose tooth-lined exoskeleton had been scarred in numerous actual combat operations, pushed through the gathering to intercept Maya as she emerged. "Cadet Watson," he rumbled, his translator struggling to modulate the complex harmonics of his native speech. "The Confederation Strategic Council requests your presence for a debriefing on your tactical innovation." Zalavex stepped forward quickly. "Admiral, with respect, I'm not certain it would be prudent to share such technology with a species that has not yet completed full integration protocols. The implications for defensive systems throughout Confederation space are precisely why we need to understand what she's discovered," Admiral Pex interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. "If a first-year cadet can devise a method to collapse our most sophisticated defensive systems without firing a shot, we need to know how it works before someone else figures it out." Zalavex felt his secondary heart racing. The Admiral was right, of course, but something about the situation felt dangerously out of control. This human, this Deathworlder, had just demonstrated a tactical innovation that could render obsolete defensive systems that had protected Confederation worlds for millennia. "I would be honored to brief the Council," Maya said, her voice carrying that same unnerving calm that had characterized her throughout the simulation. "Though I should note that the simulation constraints actually limited the effectiveness of the gravitational resonance technique. In real space, with actual subspace field dynamics rather than simulated ones, the effect would be considerably more pronounced." Admiral Pex's outer mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement or concern. "All the more reason for a thorough discussion. Cadet, come." As they turned to leave, Pex added over his shoulder, "You as well, Commander Zalavs. Your expertise will be valuable in contextualizing this development." 2 hours later, Zalavix found himself in the hallowed chambers of the Confederation Strategic Council, a body he had only encountered twice in his long career. Around the circular table sat the most influential military minds in known space: Governor Venn of the Central Systems, Call of the Diplomatic Corps, Hex of the Science Directorate, and half a dozen others representing various species and strategic interests. Admiral Pex guided Maya to a position at the center of the chamber, where holographic displays could capture and amplify her presentation for all to see. Zalavex was directed to a secondary position nearby, close enough to contribute, but clearly not the focus of attention. "The Council is now in session," Governor Venn announced, her crystalline voice resonating in the perfect acoustics of the chamber. "We are convened to assess a tactical innovation demonstrated by human cadet Maya Watson during a training simulation at the Galactic Strategy Academy. Call, whose species communicated partially through color changes in their translucent skin, shifted to a skeptical blue-green. Before we proceed, I must ask, Commander Zalavs, is there any possibility that this was a simulation malfunction rather than a legitimate tactical success?" All eyes turned to Zalavs. He felt the weight of 27 cycles of professional reputation pressing down on him. How easy it would be to suggest that the human had somehow exploited a flaw in the programming, that this wasn't a legitimate victory at all. But his scientific integrity wouldn't allow such a deception. "No," he said firmly. "The simulation functioned exactly as designed. Cadet Watson identified and exploited a previously unconsidered weakness in our defensive doctrine. There was no malfunction, no cheating, no shortcut. She simply thought differently than any cadet I have ever taught." A murmur ran through the assembled council members. Different how? Hex asked, the multiple eyes characteristic of his species blinking in sequence. Zalavex hesitated, organizing his thoughts. In 27 cycles of teaching, I have observed cadets from 17 species approach tactical problems. Despite their biological and cultural differences, they all eventually converge on similar solutions: variations of force concentration, technological advantage, or psychological manipulation. Cadet Watson. He paused, searching for the right words. Cadet Watson appears to perceive the battlefield itself as a malleable medium, rather than simply a space in which forces maneuver. He gestured to the holographic display, which now showed a simplified version of Maya's fleet movements during the simulation. Rather than trying to overcome the defensive systems directly, she altered the fundamental properties of the battle space to make those systems irrelevant. It's not just innovative, it represents an entirely different paradigm of tactical thinking. Governor Ven's crystalline features shifted in a pattern that indicated deep concern. Is this human a threat? Could this technique be used offensively against Confederation worlds? Before Zalaps could respond, Maya spoke up, her voice calm but carrying clearly throughout the chamber. The technique I demonstrated could indeed be applied offensively, she acknowledged. However, its greatest value lies in its non-destructive nature. Traditional approaches to overcoming defensive systems inevitably result in casualties and infrastructure damage. The gravitational resonance method I employed disabled the defenses while preserving both lives and assets intact. She paused, looking around the chamber with that same steady gaze that had unnerved Zalavs from the first day of class. I should also note that any defense system can be modified to resist this approach. Once its principles are understood, I would be happy to work with Confederation engineers to develop countermeasures. Call's skin shifted to a curious purple. You would help us defend against the very technique you pioneered? Of course, Maya replied. The purpose of tactical innovation isn't to create unbeatable advantages, but to drive the evolution of both offensive and defensive capabilities. The lesson here isn't that gravitational resonance is the ultimate weapon. It's that our thinking about space warfare has become too constrained by tradition and expectation. Admiral Pex stepped forward. Council members, I believe we have an unprecedented opportunity before us. Cadet Watson has demonstrated not just a new tactic, but a new way of thinking about tactics. I propose we establish a joint species tactical innovation command, with Cadet Watson as its director and Commander Zalavex as senior advisor. Zalavex felt his scales ripple in surprise. He had expected to be reprimanded, perhaps even demoted, for allowing such a potentially destabilizing technique to be developed under his supervision. Instead, Pex was proposing to elevate him to a new position, alongside the very cadet who had upended his carefully maintained tactical worldview. The council debated the proposal vigorously, with some members expressing concern about entrusting such responsibility to a representative of a species so new to the Confederation. Others worried about the implications of the gravitational resonance technique becoming widely known. But in the end, Admiral Pex's argument prevailed. Better to incorporate this new thinking into Confederation doctrine than to ignore or suppress it. 2 cycles later, the Joint Species Tactical Innovation Command, JSTIC, was formally established, with Maya Watson appointed as its first director, despite her junior status, and Zalavex as her principal advisor. Their first meeting took place in a newly allocated facility near the Academy, where holographic displays showed ongoing simulations of various applications of the resonance technique. As they reviewed the initial research parameters, Zalavex found himself asking the question that had bothered him since the simulation. Why didn't you implement the resonance strategy earlier in the exercise? You had gathered sufficient data by the middle of the second day. Maya turned to him, and for the first time, he saw something like warmth in her expression. 2 reasons, she said. First, I needed to be absolutely certain of my data. The consequences of a miscalculation in real combat would be severe. She paused, then added, "And second, I wanted to give my classmates the opportunity to succeed through their own methods before I intervened with mine." Zalav's breathing flaps fluttered in surprise. "You were being courteous?" "I was respecting their tactical traditions," Maya corrected gently. "Each species in the Confederation has developed combat doctrines over thousands of years, shaped by their biology, their history, their values. I didn't want to dismiss those traditions by immediately implementing an approach they hadn't encountered before." Zalavex studied her with new understanding. "You weren't just trying to beat us," he realized. "You were trying to learn from us first." Maya nodded. "Earth, what you call a death world, taught humans to survive through adaptation and learning. We became apex predators, not just through strength or speed, but through observation and innovation. Those same qualities serve us well as we join the galactic community." For the first time in his long career, Zalavx found himself re-evaluating core assumptions that had guided his teaching for 27 cycles. Perhaps there was value in approaches that didn't fit neatly into established doctrine. Perhaps standing outside the consensus could be an advantage rather than a liability. "In all my time teaching at the Academy," he admitted, "I've always believed in the superiority of proven tactical doctrine. Now I see that sometimes the most valuable perspective is the one that hasn't been shaped by our traditions at all." Maya smiled, a gesture Zalavs was beginning to recognize as genuinely friendly rather than threatening. Different evolutionary paths lead to different ways of perceiving the same reality. The Confederation's greatest strength could be the diversity of its thinking, not just its technology or numbers. As they continued their work, laying the groundwork for what would become a revolution in Confederation military doctrine, Zalavix observed the gathered staff, a mixture of species, each bringing unique perspectives to the problems before them. At their center stood Maya, the Deathworlder who had quietly upended centuries of tactical orthodoxy without firing a shot. Other members of the Academy had initially been shocked to see the previously arrogant Commander Zalavix working so closely with a human cadet. But as the days passed, those who knew him best noted a change in his demeanor, a new openness, a willingness to question even his most deeply held assumptions. "We cannot know what challenges await us beyond the galactic rim," Zalavx found himself thinking as he watched Maya explaining a complex subspace interaction to a group of veteran tacticians. "But, at least now, I have learned to see the universe through different eyes." In the months that followed, as reports arrived of unusual activity beyond the Confederation's outer territories, Zalavx found himself oddly comforted by the presence of the quiet Deathworlder at his side. Whatever threats might emerge from the darkness between the stars, they would face them with the combined wisdom of 17 species and the unpredictable, innovative mind of a predator species that had survived one of the harshest crucibles the galaxy had to offer. Perhaps, he reflected, that was exactly what they needed. The end.